Well, hey guys, it's JB back with you, and man, do I have a banger of an episode today. You'll notice behind me, I don't have my fancy background like I usually do, and that's because I'm between offices moving, and so it's a little bare bones today, but I picked a great day to do that because we're going to class the joint up a little bit with our guest, Miss Jackie Kaminsky, otherwise known as the Fight Nutritionist. What is a fight nutritionist? Hey, Jackie, thank you for joining the show. So what is a fight nutritionist? Well, simply put, it's someone who provides advanced nutritional support to fighters. That's my definition. People who fight in combat, either for a living or as a major part of their life. But a little bit about Jackie, and I'm going to read some of this because I want to make sure I get it right, because the girl's done the work and she deserves the credit. So Jackie Kaminsky, the fight nutritionist, is a registered and licensed dietitian with a Master of Science in Exercise and Physiology in sports nutrition after she got a bachelor's degree from Florida State. So she's a Seminole, maybe a rough year for her, but we'll maybe get into that. In addition, this was really interesting, and I think we'll get into this origin story, but what really stuck out to me was it seemed like her interest in fight nutrition and sports nutrition really got a boost when she did a 3-month internship in the summer some years ago at the UFC, Ultimate Fighting Championship, for those of you who don't know, Performance Institute in Las Vegas, which I happen to have been to, and it's something that Dana White, who, especially today, everybody knows, has just done what seems like an unbelievable job with creating an environment for fighters and people who do this for a living to be the best version of themselves that they can. So with that said, Jackie, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So you go to Florida State, and if I understand correctly, you did both your undergrad there and then you stayed and went on for your master's level.
Correct.
And so before you did, was that internship that you did at the UFC Performance Center, was that during or right after college, or was there some time in between where you were exploring what to do, or you were doing something else?
No, so it was during college. So my master's was an MSDI. So to be a registered dietitian, you have to do a dietetic internship through an accredited organization. And a lot of universities now combine a master's and dietetic internship together, so you don't have to separate them. So it was summertime coming up and I needed one of my internship rotations fulfilled. And because my master's, my focus was sports nutrition, that was a specialty rotation that I was able to do. And at the time, I was just taking some kickboxing fitness classes, like not by any means like real fighting. It was like a 9-round. So boxing fitness, like you're not, intimidating anyone with those moves.
You're not about to join slap fight.
No. But at the time, it just sparked a really interesting question for me, because in terms of the athletes that we are presented with and taught about in school, in terms of the different fields that you could get into, fighting was never one of them. It's still very nuanced. It was still very new and upcoming. And I just happened to see the UFC Performance Institute was hiring for interns that summer. And I was like, wow, that seems like a really cool sport to get into. I've never heard of anyone talk about this, especially in my field. And I applied. I was one of 500 applicants. And I still to this day have no idea why they chose me. Every time I go back and I see them, I'm like, what did I say in this interview that impressed you? Because all I remember saying was like, I know jack shit about fighting. I don't know anything about the sport. I don't know who's who, but I'm really interested in learning more about what you guys do and how you help these athletes. And it just, it kind of became a love and a passion after that.
Well, you're being humble, probably selling yourself short a little bit, like a lot of us tend to do, but knowing a little bit about Dana. So Dana, he has an interesting story. He's a very interesting guy. And a lot of people think he's from Vegas. Some people know that he also is sort of also from Boston. But what not a lot of people know is that he spent a lot of time in rural Maine. And he just happens to have spent a lot of time in rural Maine, about 20 miles from where I grew up. So it's a small state, and we know some of the same people. And I have followed him for a long time, since really the moment when UFC, when they purchased it, him and the Fertitta brothers. And at that time, it was a cockfight. That's really what it was. It was a spectacle. Nobody took it seriously. You had a literally 500-pound sumo wrestler fighting against 180 pound, Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner. One of the crazies. Like, it was just absurd. And they bought it, professionalized it. He believed in it, brought in Joe Rogan, which turned out to pretty well for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And what I know, just based upon from a business guy's perspective, watching him, is they don't really care what your background is, and in some cases, even what your maybe bona fides are. What they seem to care about is that you're passionate, that you're hardworking, that you're willing to learn, and that you want to go in and do the work, and that certainly comes through from you. So my guess is that's what they picked up on. But what I would love to know is, so you get in there,
Mm-hmm.
and you said you really hadn't thought much about fighting because, I'm sure college is still catching up. I think you're right. It's combat sport is growing so fast, but it takes time for academia to catch up. And this is true in business too. Marketing, we see it all the time, or even private equity. What's being taught in university is usually 5 to 10 years behind what's happening in the world. And so I'm guessing that happened with sports. But so you get in there, and how was it maybe different than you thought, or exactly what you thought, or what was it about working at the UFC and that internship that made you think, oh, wow, this might be something that I want to do with my career?
Well, I would say, so when I got there, I mean, I didn't really have any expectations. When I got there, their internship, the PI was still fairly new, I think a couple years old at that point. So I was, I think, maybe their second or third intern in the Performance Institute ever. So the program was still very underdeveloped. I mean, my first day, my internship director at the time, well, he's the director of nutrition at the time. He kind of gave me a tour of the facility and was like, "So I have to go for 2 weeks. You got it?" And I'm like, "No." What do you mean?
Wow.
So it was definitely like I had to learn a lot, just take it day by day. And that was the year that they hired the current director of nutrition. His name's Charles Stoll, who, when he came, he completely revolutionized like the whole program at the UFC PI in terms of what they do for their athletes. It's really grown a lot, I think, because of the work that he's done. And he mentored me a lot. But what made me think that I wanted to take or have a career in this field was more that being an impatient person and understanding how to take advantage of opportunities when they arise. I wasn't interested in finishing my degree because I knew I always wanted to work in sports. I didn't want to work in a hospital setting. I was probably the most depressed I've ever been, working in a hospital for 12 weeks. Gen Pop was just not really kind of my cup of tea, just in terms of like, I just felt like it was really easy. It's low hanging fruit. I like a little bit more of a challenge. So I knew athletics was where I wanted to be, but because football, basketball, baseball, hockey, even, it's so saturated in terms of nutrition and exercise science, like there's so many professionals in those spaces already. To even get a foot in the door with a master's degree and all this experience, it's like you got to start at the bottom. So
You're like, oh, that's cute. Good for
I'm
you.
like, yeah, fresh out of college, I'm 60K in debt. All right, I gotta be making 30K a year, working 70+ hour weeks. I was like, I'm not interested in that.
That's not winning.
No, that's not winning. I don't feel like starting at the bottom and working my way up. Because fighting is basically the complete opposite. So in terms of what I do nutritionally for fighters, because it's the complete opposite of what we're taught in school, a lot of professionals don't want to touch it. At least in my space. They're like, what do you mean you're going to have someone cut 20 pounds in one night? That's ridiculous. Or 40 pounds in a month. Like, what, like that, we would never advise that. That's so unhealthy. I'm like, oh, I'm very aware it's unhealthy, but my job's not to keep them healthy. It's to prevent them from dying. Like, just plain and simple. And so because I've lived in South Florida, I came back after the internship and I got introduced to fighting, and I started actually training kickboxing, and I started realizing how many coaches are down here, big gyms. We have American Top Team, Kill Cliff, a bunch of huge boxing gyms. And I just realized how big the market was down here. I go, well, shit, no one's really in this field in terms of other dietitians. I mean, we have the UFC Performance Institute, which is really the only organization that provides nutritional guidance for these athletes. No one else really does private practice. I found out about someone in Australia who I modeled my business after. So I was really one of the first ones here in the States that I would, in terms of not someone who's necessarily in the space doing the work, but someone of my caliber, a registered dietitian, master's degree, a scientist, like actually studying and trying to help improve this field. Like I was one of the first ones in it. So 2020 came, I launched my business, COVID hit. It was a great time.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing. And yeah, it just really took off, and I was really able to kind of make a name for myself in this space. And and now it's just grown so much. So it's become saturated. So now the competition is there, but I felt like, I found a way to get into it before it became popular. And that's how I was kind of able to grow my business and my name within it.
Yeah, so you were early, and so man, I tell you, listening to your story, I'm getting so fired up and excited because what I'm hearing is very similar to my own and so many entrepreneurs' stories who have had success. Where at the beginning you're just sort of you don't really know what it is that you're going to do, and you're fumbling around a little bit, but you're not afraid to get in and take a risk and what I will say is break some shit and figure out what it is that you're going to do and who you're going to serve. And if you listen to what Jackie said, you guys know with Build to Sell that I'm always looking for the signs, and you can usually find them when you look backwards. And so what did she do? She recognized that the passion that she had, the thing that she wanted to do, to be a nutritionist and to really work in sports and to be a sports scientist in that way, the traditional paths available to her were saturated, right? That's classic red ocean. When you're looking at that, you're like, oh man, do I really want to go and compete with 1,000 others that are doing the same thing with similar credentials and become just a me too sort of product or service? Or do I want to try to figure out a niche that might be emerging and underserved where I can go in and grow with it and dominate that niche and get in so early that by the time other people come in, and they will, I'm still already so established that it would be not that I'm, not going to work hard and continue to evolve and grow and provide great services and products. But it's really difficult for someone to then come in and try to compete with you because they're starting late. So man, what an awesome story. What a little bit of a risk that you took. So I'm sensing maybe a little risk taker in you. So
there was no,
well, so
the risk kind of more was in the fact that I've just graduated college, fresh out of school.
You have debt.
And I mean, mind you, no prior work experience outside of my internships and maybe like bartending jobs here and there, which I'm not meant to be a server. I learned that very early on, and I'm very bad at that. And the world shut down. No one's hiring. And I took the risk in the sense that I was like, well, I'm not going to wait around for the world to open up to get a job. We don't know. At the time, none of us knew how long that was going to last. So I said, screw it. Like, let me bet on myself. Let me just start. I just started on Instagram. Let me just start putting out content, seeing how it works, promoting my services. And that was the other benefit of working in fight sports. It was as Dana opened up the UFC fairly quickly. It was like within 6 months or the first year that, I went to the first UFC event in Jacksonville that they held during COVID. One of my fighters was competing on that card. So, that it just ended up being really great in that sense too, because it was the first sport to start opening up. So, of course, and the fights are happening almost every single weekend. So it was great for me at that time. So everything just ended up aligning really well. But I took the risk to bet on myself to start my own company as a new professional in the field. And now we're almost 5 years in.
I love it. And it's interesting because I think a lot of us who are in any kind of business, if you look at your story, folks know my story and a lot of the folks that I've had the chance to interact with, there has to be that at some point inflection where the odds are probably against you. That there are going to be and are a lot of people who are telling you what can't be done and maybe a safer path. And there's always this point in someone's origin story who has had success where they decided to say, yeah, that's probably all true. Screw it. I'm doing it anyway.
Yep.
And you certainly have that story. Dana has that story, and he has it multiple times because you bring up a great point. He really was the first major sport. And to be clear, yes, we can include fight sport as a major sport now. We're well past that. Just the numbers that, if you took a look at social media, the numbers that the UFC, bare knuckle, which is different, power slap, the numbers that they're doing in terms of views and eyeballs are destroying the other major sports. Now, the NFL still dominates traditional airwaves, but we're here where professional fighting in its different forms isn't going anywhere. And Dana was the first one to make it must have been an incredibly hard decision to say, you know what, we're going to do it, and we're going to reopen, and we're going to put on events despite everybody, just these headwinds telling him not to do it. And he did it anyway. And I think he was on, I don't know if it was Theo Vaughn's or somebody else's podcast, and they asked him about that time. And he said, really, it was about the people that worked for them. And he felt such a strong responsibility to make sure that those people were okay. You know, the board wanted him to fire half of them. And he said, well, if not as long as I'm here, you might as well get rid of me too. And I so admire people like that who, and like yourself, who just, they know the odds are against them, but they just figure it out anyway and make it happen. So when you get into really working with these truly elite athletes, and you're right, combat sports, the nutrition is different, and it's changed over time, you know, because I was a pretty good wrestler as a high school athlete.
So you know.
I do, but it was different. It was very different. And then I had the opportunity to coach my son, you know, decades later. So when I was doing it in the 80s and the 90s, I can't really say that you would call the nutritional paradigms we were following elite. It was just sort of, you would go between these wild swings of carb loading was really big back then. So you would eat pasta, and then you'd have to weigh in. And to your point, if you had to cut 15, 20 pounds of weight, you would wear garbage bags underneath your stuff all day. You would sleep that way. You would have a cup that you would spit in. You would intentionally dehydrate yourself and really starve yourself and not take any calories in. And then wonder why, yes, you made weight, but you didn't perform well in the match because your body didn't have the ability to perform when you just put it through what you did. And so it was interesting to me watching my son get into the sport, and they take body composition tests at the beginning. They measure hydration, and you can't deviate too much from that hydration because then either they know that you're taking diuretics or you're losing weight in an unhealthy way. And I think that's a healthy change compared to probably what we have. But I would love to know, what's the difference, you know, for anyone listening who's not an elite athlete, an elite combat fighter, you know, what's the difference between how someone should approach their nutrition as just a normal person who's trying to stay fit, or maybe an entrepreneur or a business person? And I think there are some parallels there between the two, but between that person and someone who is making their living or spending a lot of their time in physical combat, what are the differences between the two from your perspective?
So the biggest difference, if you're separating what makes fueling an elite athlete different than, let's just say, you know, someone like you and I, just, you know, average gym goer. Obviously we like to have an active lifestyle, but, you know, we work real jobs. Our job isn't the sport. When it comes to the fighters, and the reason why I got attracted to it initially was because it was balancing maintaining really high level of performance, having the recovery, but also the weight cutting aspect. So it's, how do I take you from 180 pounds, 12% body fat, get you down to 55 or 45 at like 6-7% body fat, and make sure that you are feeling good the entire time while you're doing it. Like that's an insane.
Sounds easy.
Yeah. And it's not easy. It's very, like, everything is, it's one of those things where, you know, it's almost like bodybuilders where they're counting every single gram every single day. And the fueling strategies for combat athletes are wildly different than bodybuilders. I think a lot of old school mentalities, a lot of fighters, because there wasn't anyone like me in the field, that they would go to bodybuilders and utilize their strategies because they get so lean.
Massive amounts of protein, I'm guessing. And
yeah, super high protein, but they're cutting the carbs. But bodybuilders, they're not doing high intensity cardio. Like they're not, you know, and they're not getting punched in the face all day long. So the fueling like these athletes still have to eat a high amount of carbohydrates in
Mm.
order to perform, but it's every single day. Everything has to be so calculated because it's just enough to give you energy, but not enough to make you gain weight. Like, okay,
Mm.
here's just enough for the recovery, the energy, you're going to perform really well, but we're changing it just a little bit every single day, every single week, so that weight continuously comes off.
So it sounds like you're tying. This is really interesting. It sounds like you're getting so specific that you might actually need to know from one of the athletes you're working with. Okay, tell me in detail what your workout Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday are going to look like, because
I
you
all
can
my
maybe.
consultations, yep, every single one of my consultations with my athletes is, we'll spend an hour, hour and a half, but the majority of it is take me through your daily schedule, Monday through
Mm,
Sunday, from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep,
wow.
what every training session is like. What do you rate that training session on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of intensity? Like, I need to know. And at this point, obviously, I've done it so much, I can kind of get a guesstimation of how intense certain sessions are. But like, literally every single day, the food is catered to the energy expenditure they're putting out. So they
Mm,
are, we're keeping them in a very, very small range of, again, enough fuel to be able to perform really well, recover, but like also still continuously lose the body weight while preserving your muscle as much as
mm.
possible.
That's
Whereas,
fascinating.
someone like you or me, we have more room for,
Donuts.
yeah.
I'm joking.
We have more room to kind of slip up. It's just things will kind of average out maybe by the end of the week. We don't need to focus so much on the timing of things, whereas an elite level athlete, timing is everything.
Mm,
The composition of our meals can be a little bit different. Now, the base is still the same. We want a high protein diet because that's going to facilitate uh, growth of our muscle, but also the recovery aspect. Higher protein means you're fuller for a longer period of time, you're more satiated, burns body fat. So if you're trying to lose weight, high protein means less body fat.
mm.
Complex carbs for energy, again, satiation, and then healthy fats or fruits and
What's a
vegetables.
complex carb for those who don't know?
Anything that is going to be like a whole grain. So we would say potatoes, whole grain pasta, breads, beans, lentils, anything like that. Yeah. Some fruit. I would say I put fruits in the complex carb category just because they are higher in vitamins and minerals.
Mm.
But the way they break down into your system would probably follow more suit with what a simple carb would do.
Ah,
Yeah.
so some fruits are more like a candy bar than they are a potato. Okay.
I wouldn't even say more of a candy bar. It's just the more of the way they break down in the system for your
Yeah.
body to be able to utilize for energy. So in that pathway, yeah, but I hate saying candy bar because then people are like, well, then I can just eat a candy bar instead of
Ah.
a banana. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
like, that's not
Yeah.
the
I hear
same.
you. I hear you. So, do you get to the degree of, I'm just genuinely curious about these things. One, but just remembering back to when the dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was doing this insane, amount of exercise and workouts. Because even high school wrestlers, the workouts, if you've never seen them, people don't understand how intense wrestlers work. Because I played football, I wrestled, and I played baseball. And football was hard for different reasons because it's collision every single time. But it's not the same level of physical exertion. Certainly, baseball isn't, as wrestling. Practices were brutal, and they are brutal. And there's a lot of women getting into it, which I think is amazing. And anyone who makes it through a full year, even if you just do it for a year in pee-wee, middle school, high school, college, you continue, it doesn't matter to me. If you make it through a full year of what it takes to go through practice, even if you never, you know, maybe make the starting team or whatever, you have my respect because it is such a physically demanding thing. And then what we never did, because it really wasn't available back then, I'd probably have a very different shaped face if combat sports was available right when I got out of high school, because I would have liked it. But you add striking to that. You add the different things that they have to. So they have to train in grappling. These days, if you're going to be a mixed martial artist, you have to be a good grappler.
Yep.
You have to train in striking. So if you started off as a great grappler, you have to become at least dangerous enough as a striker to both defend yourself and to end a fight. Submissions, which is not really a thing in traditional folk style, wrestling. That's another type. Guard was not a thing that we
Mhm.
ever dealt with. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So did different activities, different days. So let's say 1 hour of stand-up sparring versus 1 hour of intense grappling versus 1 hour of, you're on the bottom and you're in guard work. Do those have different nutritional requirements? Is that a dumb question? I'm just curious.
No, it's a really great question. So, yes and no. So, the easiest way for me to determine the nutritional requirements for a session, I have everyone or all of my athletes rate their sessions on a scale of 1 to 10
Okay.
in terms of the intensity of the workout, because that's going to determine the energy source that your body is going to be able to utilize. So I say, okay, if you're going to rate and like on a scale of 1 to 10, one being like you're at Disney World, you're walking around the theme park all day, like after a while, yeah, you're tired, but you can maintain that for a really long time versus like 10 is you're crawling back to the car because you're so exhausted. Like
Yeah.
you've almost died after
You've
the
been
work.
in fight or flight for an hour.
Mhm. Yeah. So if they're rating it a 7 or higher, then I'm determining that session to be a high intensity session. So
Mm-hmm.
that means I'm putting more carbs before that session because the levels that they're performing and they have to maintain that, sustain that for such a long period of time, their body can literally only utilize carbs for those sessions. So
Mm.
that's where we're going to put, yeah. And then that depends on how long it is. Is it 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours? I have guys that start at 5 o'clock and they end at 9, so how much I give you before that session, are we talking about having little snack breaks during?
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, that will essentially kind of facilitate the fueling strategies versus it's like, okay, maybe it's jujitsu, but it's mainly technique work. We're not doing live rounds. Like maybe it's like a 5 or 6. Then we're gonna maybe not give them as much food before that session, or it's a smaller snack, or the composition of the meal is a little bit different. Maybe we include more fats, or maybe it's just more fruit based, or adding some protein beforehand. So that would essentially kind of change the fueling strategies depending on the intensity of the session, not so much if it's grappling versus striking versus wrestling. That's not so
Mm.
much what they're doing. It's just more about the intensity that the rating of what we call the rating of perceived exertion. What are you perceiving the difficulty of that session to be, and how much are you pushing yourself at that really high level?
Yeah. So it's RPE. Is that what you call
Yep.
it? Yep. I
Yep.
like that.
Yep.
Makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like what I'm hearing is that you say it's not just you're helping them understand what to eat, but what was interesting about what you just said was that you're also helping them understand when to eat it as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how long maybe before you work out, or what was really interesting is you saying maybe stop a workout and have a snack or a meal, because you don't really think about that. But to your point, if someone's going from 5 to 9 and they're going to that 7 or above exertion level, their reserves are going to probably be pretty quickly depleted. Now, what about hydration? Electrolytes and balancing those things. Is that something that you would deal with as well, or is it mostly? Yeah.
100%. So, I mean, more often than not, and this is where our weight cutting guidelines come in. If you look at football players, there's like so much research, right, with hydration and dehydration. Because I mean, you'll see football
Concussions even. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll see football players lose, after a practice 15, 20 pounds, like it's nothing. So just losing 2% of your body weight and body water is already going to decrease your aerobic performance. So same thing like how I'm teaching them how to eat before, I'm telling them, okay, this is, how much water, not only do you need to drink on a daily basis, but this is how much water you need during your session, or sorry, not during your session. This is how much water you need right before your session. This is the water bottle size that I want you to bring with you during the training. If it's lasting more than an hour and a half, we're putting electrolytes in that water. But fighting, so the thing with fighting that I don't necessarily do so much with the electrolytes, I don't necessarily always have them add electrolytes during training,
Mm.
only because during the actual fight, they're not allowed to have anything but water.
Right.
So while I want them to have water, I don't want them to become reliant on the electrolytes.
Mm.
So I do more of like, okay, if we do electrolytes, maybe have them in the water before they train and then right after for the replenishment, but not so much during the actual training. Again, unless it's like I said, if they have like a 5 to 9, this is now we're just focused more on having good performance the entire time. So like 100%, we're going to throw some electrolytes in the water bottle.
That makes a lot of sense, because you wouldn't want to let their body get used to an adaptation that will not be available to them when they really need it the most. That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
One last question on sort of the nuance of what you do, and then I kind of want to get into the business around it because it's really fascinating as well. But is there a difference? So I have a son and I have two daughters. All three of them or have been athletes, and we're seeing such an explosion in the popularity of women in fight sports as well. Is there any meaningful difference in your experience between the way that you would approach nutrition for a female fighter versus nutrition for a male fighter?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
If you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple,
Yup.
she's vigorously nodding her head.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I've done quite a few conferences speaking about this topic actually. And I reach out to a lot of female fighters specifically because is such a male dominated industry, and the information that they're getting and the tips that they're getting are from their male coaches, not necessarily understanding their body types. Yeah. And so, I mean, I would say the biggest things are, one is basically when you are coming up with a plan to help this cohort of athletes, men are pretty textbook. They all, if you have your one methodology of doing everything, this is my outline, this is what I'm going to start with, and then obviously I adjust it to the individual person. Guys, pretty much textbook. Like they respond the same exact way. I've yet to have a female athlete where I can just come up with a very basic protocol and they all respond the same way. So everything about their physiology is different. Obviously, the menstrual cycle plays a huge role. That's different between every single female if they're on birth control, if they're not on birth control, because now you have hormones that come into play. Women are not able to lose weight at the same rate as my guys, so we can't do as big of weight cuts.
That's true in the non-athlete world too, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah. They respond to stress a lot differently. Their sweat rates are lower because, well, one, they have lower muscle mass. Again, hormonally, that can affect the way that their body temperature regulates and how much they sweat. So again, the weight cut aspect becomes a lot harder. And then because of their changing hormones throughout the months, the way they utilize energy is a lot different. So, females don't do as well with super, super low carb diets. So we have to maybe make sure that they're getting enough, again, to have the energy. But if they go too low, then they'll feel those effects much more strongly than a male athlete would. So then when you talk about the dieting component too and restricting calories, it's something called low energy availability. So my female athletes, and that's been shown in science too across the board, that females will feel the effects of that much more greatly compared to men at a lower threshold. So like the number for that term low energy availability, which just means that you are not eating enough or exercising too much beyond what your body can handle. So basically, like if I were to, in layman's terms, it'd be like, okay, let's say your base calorie needs are 1,800 calories a day. With exercise or 2,500, but you're expending like 3,000 calories plus that, like your body's not able to keep up with those adaptations, and physiologically you'll start shutting down. So that number is at about 30 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass, which is like the scientific measurement. Guys probably won't start seeing issues till about 25, where 30 seems to be that threshold. So again, the dieting aspect, having enough carbs in their system, recovery too. Recovery strategies are a lot different for females athletes compared to males. Something interesting that I learned lately, cold plunges, not great for females right after exercise, whereas guys,
really?
Super great. Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting. And the calorie deficit that you're talking about that women feel as athletes more strongly than men, I'm sure that translates to non-athletes as well. But what I'm interested to know is are there any scientific hypotheses? So what I never got to was that I was in, I would say I was an athlete, but I also was in medical for 10 years, both on the device side, the product development side, and then eventually biochem and surgery. And so I have some geeky thoughts on this. I'm interested to know if there's a hypothesis. The thing that immediately popped to my mind, it's not, correlation does not equal causation, but I'm looking at what you just said, and I'm trying to think to myself, why would that be true? And the only thing that immediately popped into my mind was that men obviously have significantly more testosterone. And I'm wondering if testosterone is the thing that maybe is the difference, that men have obviously more of. And so if you have that deficit, it's this sort of boost that allows you to work through. You're still going to pay the price at the end of it, but is there any thought as to why there's such a difference?
On the right path. I mean, it is hormones, it's with the reproductive system.
Mm.
So because women, we can make babies, we have higher needs for body fat, and our hormone profile is going to be more affected by it because our body needs more energy to essentially create life. Men, and I think that goes to this is my personal hypothesis why I think women respond differently to stress. I think evolutionarily speaking, during times of deficits, we would hold on to body fat stores much more aggressively
Mm.
because you want to conserve the energy if you are going to essentially carry a child. You need a lot of extra energy stores to literally make a human, whereas men don't have that need and they're able to function at much lower body fat percentages. If you're talking about essential body fat, for women, it's 12 to 14%. And a lot of girls, like even in the 16 to 18% range, that's still way too low for them before they start experiencing issues. Guys can be like 2, 3%, no problem. So there's a huge, so it's reproductive. Yeah,
Yeah.
function essentially.
So to put a bow on this particular topic, it sounds to me like we have just um, stumbled upon an unbelievably sort of paradigm shifting concept, which is this: men are pretty simple creatures and women are intricate and complex. So if you did not know that, you're
Wow.
welcome. Courtesy of Jackie and JB on Built to Sell podcast, we've just really put something out there. Of course, making light of it, but it's interesting that anyone who's been in a
Who would
relationship
have thought?
or
It's
or has
crazy.
kids or daughters and daughters and sons and all of that, you learn the emotional and the development and the relational differences between men and women and how we process the world around us. I never really thought that much about. That's why I asked about.
Mhm.
Surely there's some differences between elite athletes who are female and male. So thank you for that. I would love to know um, some of the business side. So you bootstrapped this. You started this from the ground up, and you've made. How many years has it been, by the way? I don't think I
It'll be 5 years in March.
5 years. Okay. So that's a pretty standard life cycle of a business that grows from nothing but an idea, a hope and a prayer and a dream and some grit to a viable business that's really doing well. And my hunch, could be wrong, but my hunch is that, like many of us, your journey, if I graft it, doesn't necessarily look like this. It probably looks more like this, this, and up. If
I
you
think
would,
it's like a nice, like it's has its peak, and now we've reached the year where but the curve is flattening out.
there you
Like
go, there you
that
go.
that's
Yeah,
yeah, you're spot on with that. The trajectory is like, oh boy, okay. How do we get
yeah,
from now this spot to this spot? We want to keep going up.
yeah. So when you started, what was harder than you thought? What was the hardest part about starting? And it doesn't necessarily have to be the thing that you were doing with working with the athletes, because I'm sure that's complex and hard. I mean more from you. You really had never been a business owner before, and you also hadn't, other than like an internship, you said you weren't in the workforce. So you're starting with a blank slate, which can be good and it can be bad. But what was harder than you thought when you look back on it?
I think the hardest part initially wasn't so much the business aspect of things, it was the buy-in.
Mm,
Because being a female in the sport too, and now I'm coming in and I'm telling coaches who've been in this sport for 30, 40 plus years, saying, hey, the way that you're coaching your athlete is not necessarily the best way. I had to be very,
diplomatic.
yeah, in terms of my approach, and understand, when is the right time to be a little bit more firm in my suggestions versus kind of go with the flow to get them to essentially accept me first.
Mm.
So it wasn't from the get-go that I was able to come in and make all these changes. It was, especially in an athletic community. I mean, you could be the smartest person in the room. If they don't like you, then you're never getting in. So
Trust.
it's
Yeah.
more about, and that was something that I'm really good at actually, and something that I attribute a lot of my success to is my networking skills. I'm really
Mm.
great with people. So I spent a lot of time my first year putting myself in the right rooms, like I said, going to the gyms, meeting the coaches, and just establishing those relationships first, getting the buy-in to then be able to implement,
Mm.
all of my fueling strategies and ways to enhance the sport and make it safer for these athletes. Um, from the business side, I was pretty fortunate to have some people around me who had experience in growing their businesses. So I was able to kind of be given a platform of like, do this with the accountant, get the right, LLC set up, this is how you should do your pricing tiers so you're not constantly chasing clients. So I was able to pretty successfully build a base. Um, but I will say that in my schooling, I don't have any background in business. So, I feel like after the first 2 years and you're getting your name out there, and like I said, you're on this upward trajectory, things are growing, then of course you kind of hit a little bit of a stagnant period and you're like, okay, well, what's next? And then, I mean, sure, okay, let's talk about marketing and developing products. And that's where I have zero idea. So that's been like just a needle in a haystack trying to figure that out. And made lots of mistakes, definitely invested in things that weren't as, I guess, so what's the word I'm looking for, profitable as I'd like them to be. So like every business person, you make not great investments, not great decisions, trying to hire people. So that was definitely a new experience for me, trying to bring people on, and then experienced that person not having the best reputation and shedding some negative light on my business. And then now they're trying to steal clients and
Oh,
the legality of everything. So I would say navigating those waters is definitely really tricky, and trying to, balance the hat of being the CEO, being a mentor, but then also still being a practitioner. Like, and I don't think anyone realizes when you're a one-man band how exhausting that is.
yeah, absolutely. And a lot of folks that listen to this can relate to that because that's true. What you just described is true, whether you're doing the thing that you're doing or whether you're a business consultant in a specific niche and you have clients that you're working with in that way, and you have a system that works and produces results for your target audience to solve a very painful, possibly expensive, limiting problem. And the issue with that is it's a double-edged sword. So you build your way through that based upon you and your unique approach, the unique characteristics that you have as a person, and you get to a certain level of success with that, and you're forced with a difficult decision. I call that no man's land, where what got you to where you are and your level of success is generally very different than what will be required of you to cross that gap, which is scary as hell, and to get to that next plateau where really it's not about you anymore. It's about the system that you've created. It's about the results that you get, and it's about leading others well to do that. And it's freaking hard to do that and to make that change. But when you're in that seat that you're still in, and I think you're probably toward the tail end of it, but the hardest part, and this is thousands of folks that I've talked to about this, and it's my own experience. You have to wear so many hats that trying to figure out which one do I take off in which order, and how do I find someone to trust to take that hat that will do a good job and to be a good steward and to do the things that I need. And it's difficult to do that, but it always pays off. And that's really the only way, because really the decision that you're having to make, and it's you or anyone else in your situation where I would call this anyone who's, in sort of a high end specialty consulting type role. And it doesn't really matter what it is that you're consulting on. You either keep pushing forward and you figure out how to systematize what you're doing and to really create a program and system that lives beyond you and that others can implement and get the same results. Or you figure out, I don't want to do that, which happens, and there's not a wrong answer. And I just want to sort of continue doing it the way that I'm doing. So how do I now make myself so attractive as a provider on the market that I can charge infinitely more? And so I can work with the same or fewer clients. Physicians are doing this, right? So we're seeing this with the physicians. Some of them have moved to, a variation of a concierge type medical practice where instead of having maybe 2,000 patients that they have total, they bump that down to 400. They charge each one of them an annual fee per year. And it's a win-win because the physician makes the same or more than they were before, and they're not having to deal with managed care. And then you also have patients who feel rightly that they're getting a lot more personal attention and access to that physician. So it's a stressful place to be, but it's it's so much fun when you make it through it. Now the marketing piece. This is always interesting because marketing is it's probably the most powerful single thing that any of us can do for our business. But you already do it, because what a lot of folks don't think of is that networking is a superpower, and networking is absolutely a viable form of marketing. What do you think, based upon, you said that it was something that gave you success early on and that it felt natural to you and you were able to really build in that way? And you're going into, you didn't say this, but I will, you're going into a little bit of an old boys club in the way that the thinking was, and you have to sort of make your bones and prove yourself that I know what I'm doing, and I can bring value here, but do that without overstepping in a way that pisses people off and they won't listen to you. What makes a good networker? How does someone maybe listening who feels similar, maybe they do something different, but they're like, man, I don't have $100,000 to drop on marketing, and even if I did, it may not pay off because you have to really know what you're doing with your spend. But I feel like I can network. I feel like I can go out there. What are some things that you think make you successful at that networking piece and sort of building those bridges?
I think the biggest piece of networking is being a good listener. I
Mm,
think that it's a communication aspect, and I think a lot of people struggle with that because when they think of networking, they're automatically thinking of like, okay, who do I need to talk to because I want to get ahead? And I think so much like you see so much of that already, especially on social media, and everyone's just, who can I get with? Who can I be in the room with? Who can I take a picture with to make myself look better?
mm,
And I don't think there's any genuineness in that in terms of actually
mm,
building a connection. So for me, it's becoming a good listener and just thinking like, okay, how can I just talk to you like a person, and how can we just find something mutual to connect on? And is there something that I can actually help you with? Like, I'm not here to bullshit you.
yeah.
And what can you do for me? But what can I like? What value can I provide to you? Like, I'm always coming at it with that. I'm not trying to figure out what you can give me. What value can I provide you? And if it becomes a mutual exchange of values, then that's what kind of builds a really good partnership.
Mm,
Um, but good listening, honesty. I'm not someone who, like I said, is trying to get in the room and get ahead. If I think you're someone that I could build a really good connection with because you can advance my business, my practice, my name. Um, I want to make sure I vibe with you. Like,
mm,
can I talk to you on a human level?
yeah.
Like, and a lot of the times when I go to these networking events now, whether it's with coaches, or other gym owners or whomever it may be that is really successful and has a lot of connections, I'm not even talking to them about business. We're
Yeah.
talking about some stupid show on Apple TV that we watched, or the presidential election, or like
Yeah.
dating, or it's something that is just, you can kind of, I don't like it to be business all the time, like how can we just connect as people, and find, you know, just what's the word I'm looking for? Common interests.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Essentially.
think
Yeah.
so much wisdom in what you're saying, and it really echoes my own, phew, I'm afraid to say how many years it's been, but many years in business. And
Yeah.
it's understanding. It's always about the human being first. It's the human connection, and seeking to understand is never a bad strategy.
And
Asking.
I think that's a key word though, the seeking to understand. I think that was going to be my next point, was that anytime I meet somebody, I always ask so many questions about them and their journey, because I'm never in a position where I mean, I know I'm really good, but my humbled side is I know I'm not the best and I
Mm,
want to be better. So if I'm seeking somebody out, there's something that I can learn from them. And I think that puts people in a less defensive position where you're trying to sell yourself to them versus I'm just curious about you. Tell me about yourself. Like, how did you get where you are? And do you have any advice for me? Or, is there something that we can do together? Like, can I just have 5 minutes of your time? Like, I'd love to learn more about this. People love
yeah.
talking about themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you do that, and the only caveat I would say to folks who are listening to this and they say the takeaway is, all right, I'm going to go meet people and I'm going to ask them 1,000 questions. Like it has to be sincere, because one
Yeah.
thing that we are becoming, gosh, and I think that a lot of the events that are happening on the national stage, both politically, athletically, entertainment, all of it, all the trends are pointing towards we're tired of bullshit. And
Hmm.
what we really want is authenticity. I don't think most people necessarily care that much who or what you are, but what they care about is, are you showing up as exactly that? Or are you showing up in a way that's attempting to portray you as something that you're definitely not? And authenticity is what people really want. So if you can walk into a room comfortable in your own skin and you know who you are and you're just genuinely curious, and also another, I think, really beautiful, meaningful thing that you said was that you try to lead with value first. And I do the same thing. I can't tell you how many times somebody has called me 2 years after I had a random interaction with them at a talk I gave or at an event and said, "Hey, you said this thing," which I don't even remember. And I did it and it changed my business, or it changed my marriage because of what was happening in the dynamic between my business and my life. And it's wonderful to hear those stories. And I never make a dime on them, but I get a lot of goodwill. And the truth is sometimes I do. They come back later. But it's the intent. It's just, are you in it to really sincerely be of service to others and to understand? Or, and I'm sure you've seen this in the rooms that you've been in, how do you look for people who are not that, who are not looking to bring value and not looking to build sincere connections? Well, I'll give you a really low tech but clear way to find that, which is if you're in a room and someone introduces themselves to you and they ask you a question or two, and as you're answering whatever that question was, you see their eyes shifting around the room, looking for who else might be there, just in case there's someone that might be more important to talk to than you. That's always my number one sign of insincerity. And like you, I have reached a point in my career where I'm blessed to have enough success that I don't have to work with anybody. And so if I don't like someone, now the difference between like and respect, if I
Yeah,
don't
there's
like someone, I might be able to work with them depending on the reason. If it's just a quirk and, whatever. But if I don't respect someone, I absolutely will not work with you. I don't care how much money you pay me. It really doesn't matter because life is too short and I don't want to do
I
it. So
agree.
it's a really interesting thing. But what I will say is I bet you got some battle scars, because it's got to be really hard to go from building it from the ground up in the niche that you went into and plowing through some of that initial doubt and credibility building to get to where you are now. I don't imagine that someone, no matter who they are, gets through that without some scuffles along the way, which is, and pun was fully intended, given what you do, but I'm sure you had to fight your way through some of that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to develop just sports in general, you have to develop a tough skin. It's a boys' club. And sorry if your feelings get hurt, nobody cares. That's kind of the mentality.
Still got to show up to practice tomorrow.
Still got to show up. I mean, it's just, yeah, like when you're an athlete, like you're going to get injured and you still got to tough it through the next day. I mean, if you're watching UFC fighters, they have full blown, like their eye socket is falled out and they it fell
Yeah,
out and they're still fighting. Like,
absolutely.
I think for me, because I mean, genuinely, like I really love, UFC athletes, boxers, and everything because they really are like the nicest people you've ever met. They're teddy bears. Like one of my clients, Greg Hardy, former NFL
Yeah. Yep.
guy, transitioned to UFC. I mean, man's 320 pounds, 6'5", like, little old me. And he's like, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, like very, very sweet, very genuine. Um, so I love working with them, but I would say the battle scars more come from, again, kind of being a pioneer in the field, but not only a pioneer, a woman, I have
Trailblazer.
I have to deal with, oh, the pretty girl, she's not going to know enough, or like everyone, coaches, athletes, all trying to make passes at me. And, again, trying to balance that, like, I need you to respect me and understand that I'm here as a professional and to work and to help you. But also, like, I don't want to come off as like a bitch because then they're not going to listen and they don't like you. So, a lot of it has to come with that. And I personally, it's, always been important for me to build my reputation and have the respect for what I do, not so much what I've looked like. And that's also like a messaging that I try and carry in my practice is that, you know, women can be attractive and they hold more value than just how they look,
Absolutely.
and so That's probably been more of it. And that gets in my head. And I'll say that where I'm just like, I feel like I just get invited to certain events or they do want to work with me because they see how I look. And then, you know, I will tell you the first question I almost always get asked, especially when I go away to travel with my athletes or I'm with a new team. First question every single time, especially when it's obviously a guy. Are you married? Do
Really?
you have a boyfriend? And I'm like, I don't
That is
understand
never the first
how.
question that I get,
Well,
oddly enough. I don't know why. Odd.
I said for anytime I'm working with somebody new. So like, are you married? Do you have a boyfriend? I'm like, I don't understand how that affects
Wow.
this relationship or what it is. And I don't understand how that even matters or pertains to
Mm.
what it is that I'm here to do. Like, why does my personal
It
life?
shouldn't. It
And
definitely shouldn't.
yeah, and I've tried it all. Like, yeah, I'm married, I'm gay, like it doesn't
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. I was so it's funny. This is where I was gonna go, but it's interesting because I was just having a conversation last week with a dear friend of mine who's out on the West Coast, and she has worked in the music industry for a long time. She's brilliant, incredibly just full of ingenuity and creativity. She's also beautiful. And we did have this interesting conversation because she was calling me to ask about a very specific thing that she needed advice on. And then it transitioned, there was a pause, and I could tell that she wanted to ask me something else. And I thought it was about the very specific, boring to most people business question that she had. And it wasn't. She said, you've been doing this a long time. You have daughters. I see the way that you interact with people in your organization and everywhere else. Can I ask you this? And basically what she said was a version of what you just said, which is when I walk into a room, I have to clear an additional hurdle to both prove myself because of what I look like. And look, it's going to be easy for some people to look at someone like that and be like, boo hoo, you're gorgeous. Like life's hard. But look, it is.
It is, yeah.
And then the other piece of it was actually she gets those very similar questions and the boundary issue. And so the way that she handles it is anytime she has a conversation with someone that she doesn't know well, she makes a point to say my partner. And she uses, I thought it was interesting. She uses that phrase very specifically. It's actually a guy, but she says my partner because then maybe men will think, oh, she's not available, whatever. But I've also known other women who took a different approach. And I'm curious as to what's worked for you. And maybe this is helpful for you because I know just some dynamo, unbelievable women. And the ones who I see, it just looks effortless to them, are the ones who develop almost, and I don't know, I'm actually about to discriminate against you for a different reason because of your age, but they almost Don Rickles it. Do you know who Don Rickles was?
Mm-mm.
Don Rickles, you got to look him up. Don Rickles was, for many, many, many years, sort of the original roast comic. He was hilarious, but he wasn't dirty, just a very funny guy, but just quick-witted with, sort of the little friendly but subtle burns, the banter, which is very normal in athletics. And so what I'm wondering about you is that something that you can use as a tool? Because the women that I've seen the best in business, and this is what I want to end with after this, there's a huge parallel between elite business people at the higher echelons of building businesses and even in corporate America and elite athletes. Not maybe physically, but in terms of what it takes mentally and the environment that's around you. You're talking about type A people. There's some similarity to that, and it is a boys' club. So they are able to just sort of become really good at just the cutting zingers that are friendly, but also like, you sure you really want to do this? Because we can do this. And that's usually enough for most men, other than just the ones that you probably shouldn't have in your organization in the first place, to chuckle and be like, okay, all right, fair enough. Like, is there any of that with you?
I mean, that's a hallmark sign of my personality, like sarcasm at its finest, little zingers here and there. And I do it like where I play up is like the cute blonde. So like even if I'm
Yeah.
saying something incredibly insulting, I do it with like a smile and like a little
Yeah.
shrug,
Yeah,
and
see,
they love
that's an
it.
advantage you do have that I don't. Like if I say certain thing to another guy, now here, well, I'll say this in fairness, I do get away with saying very direct things to people that maybe not everybody does. Because for me, it's a different reason. So when you look the way that I do, and I'm 6'2", I tend to be quieter and I tend to be more what's going on, and I don't really ever yell. And so because of that, I can get away with saying direct things to people because they know that if I'm saying it, it's not coming from a place of I'm trying to make you feel awful or whatever. It's coming from a place of, hey, listen, I've been there. I've probably made that mistake. I've probably done that 30 times. It's not going to work out the way you think it is. Maybe we want to rethink that. But for you, I could see that really being effective. But I do not want you to leave this podcast and not go and look up some old Don Rickles
I know I
clips.
need to. I'm gonna like write it down right now.
Best. So I'd love to finish up with this. I had the opportunity a few years ago to listen. I don't know if you've ever heard of this lady, but she was another brilliant woman um, named Dr. Gabrielle Lyons. And I was at an event with her, and what she does is she's a physician who figured out she was working with elite warfighters, both active and retired. So you're talking about, and I have worked with a number of these people as well who've transitioned to business. And you're talking about Navy SEALs, Delta Force Rangers, CIA operatives, these folks who just lived a very kind of like elite fighter athletes. They've lived a very unusual life, and their nutritional, medical, psychological, hormonal needs are different than the average person. I think similarly to warfighters. But here's what she said that I thought was fascinating. She's built this entire practice on continuing to work with those people, but when they do all these biomarker studies and they do this crazy deep lab, and it's got to be 300 results on this lab, they figured out over time that high level entrepreneurs and elite warfighters have very similar biochemistry.
Interesting.
And so my suspicion is, knowing that and knowing the why as she unpacked it, that there's probably also a similarity between elite athletes that are fighters, high level entrepreneurs, and war fighters. So here's how I'm going to tie this all with a bow. All of you were like, where is JB going? Promise you, I always land, I always land the plane for you. What can someone who is not a daily fighter, they're not maybe exerting themselves physically, but they were what I might call a mental or energetic or cognitive warrior every day, because they're out there having to just go to extreme lengths of discomfort in business that most human beings are not willing to do. It's our version of that. We take risks. You've done it. We take risks that most people are deeply uncomfortable with. We push through things that most people would run away from. That takes a toll physically. It takes a toll mentally. It takes a toll emotionally. And I don't think enough of us, and I put myself in this category, think about nutrition as being vitally important to, if you are a business performance athlete and you want to be at your very best to perform well, it would seem to me that there are many things you could do nutritionally that don't involve just, whatever you want to do and see what happens, that you maybe could pull from the work that you do with elite fighters. Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I would think that, if for someone who has to operate on such an intense elite level, mentally, it's not just physically, requires so much attention to detail and management of stress responses, so
Cortisol and all this stuff.
vertically, yeah, and your body does not absorb nutrients efficiently when it's under those stressors. So focusing on a whole food diet, taking the appropriate vitamins and minerals to make sure that you're getting all the micronutrients needed for just brain metabolism, if you just think about that, consuming enough water, and again, a lot of the timing of the nutrients too, like depending if you want to study, for yourself, like, are you most active in the mornings? Or are you most active at night? Like, what fueling strategies can you implement around just your day-to-day tasks that would allow you to still operate at such a high level? Making sure that you're getting breakfast before those morning meetings, or, getting a good dose of energy with caffeine and hydrating enough before some afternoon sessions where you got to brainstorm and really be present. So yeah, absolutely. The nutrition plays a crucial role in that, especially if if you want to be the best of the best. So you got to make sure that you're giving this. Let me just put it really simply. This is how I tie it together. I tell my fighters, I go, okay, if you want to be a world champion, let's take the body, let's compare it to a car, right? Because a car can't go anywhere without gas. The Ferrari's not getting unleaded fuel. The Ferrari's getting premium fuel. Do you want to be a Ferrari? Then you need to make sure that you're putting the right fuel in your body. Otherwise, you're not going to go very far. If you can go far, you're not going to feel good doing it. So you need to be putting, if you want to be the best and you want to perform at really high levels, what you're putting in your body to allow yourself to do that matters. So
Mm.
high quality nutrients, getting enough water in every day, making sure you're getting the right vitamins and minerals, making your body, so to speak, keeping the engine running, at a high level.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, as we land the plane, one, I want to thank you for doing the podcast and to spend some time with me. It's been so much fun to get to know you a little bit and learn about what you do. I love, 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 and you all know this about me. I love interesting niches that folks find and just grab onto and turn something into of them. I love that. Always one of my favorite business stories. But also as a dad, who have three beautiful kids and two young daughters, what I really truly admire about you is that you went to college and you even went for an advanced degree, which right now is becoming so out of it's becoming unpopular, and we're starting to question, maybe rightly, whether that makes sense for everybody. But what I really love about your story that I think is so unique is that you did those things because you wanted to. You had an interest and a passion in what you were studying, and you really got to a point where, there's really only one more after this for a terminal degree for you. But
Yeah.
what's fascinating to me is that you said, I did what I wanted to do. I went to college. I did that experience. I learned what I wanted to learn. I got out. I looked around. I did not like the options that were available to me in terms of building a career, what I could make, what I would be doing. And I said, that doesn't have to define me. You said that to you. You said, that doesn't really need to define. I don't know. I know I don't like working in hospitals. I know I don't doing Gen Pop stuff. I'm not wired for that, but I still believe that I can make great use of what I learned. I just need to figure out how to do it in a different way that maybe nobody's thought of. That, ladies and gentlemen, is entrepreneurship. That is what America is built on. And
Absolutely.
I love that story. And as a dad of two daughters, I'm going to have them watch this podcast. And I'm really, truly honored and humbled. And so I admire you very much for what you've built.
Well, if you admire that so much, then you should bring me back for another episode because then I can tell you how I actually got suspended from grad school and still found a
Oh,
way to
hell
grad.
yes. We can have that episode because I can tell you how I got kicked out of boarding school. That'll be a
Let's
really fun
go.
episode. Let's do that. Well, I do want to. So, one, I didn't ask you this, and I'm realizing I'm remiss. So, I am going to ask it now. Do you only work with elite fighters, or would you work with others as well?
I work with a variety of clients. So, I mean, fighting's the cool factor. That's the niche, obviously, that I created. I work with a variety of athletes, or just like the weekend warrior types, just high performing individuals, people who, they just want to lead healthier lifestyles, even if it is just weight loss, eat better.
Mm,
I've had actually quite a few people, women especially, approach me with different issues that they have, PCOS. I'm
yeah.
a big type 1 diabetic nerd.
Oh.
So I've worked with quite a few type 1 individuals to
Probably
help.
some thyroid issues with women, I'm guessing.
Yeah, some thyroid. I've done it all. Gut health
Yeah.
issues.
Oh,
So my ideal client is someone who is just already, they're internally motivated. They have a goal and they want to get it done, and they just realize that they just need that extra push or some professional guidance in terms to get there. Someone who's making a lot of excuses and doesn't want to put in the work, I'm like, I'm not a therapist. So like,
sounds a lot like me.
well, I will give you all the tools you need to be successful and I guarantee the results, but you got to do the work. I can only do so much.
Love it. Well, we're going to post your website in the show notes, but where else can people find you or find out more about you if they want to?
I am most active on social media at the Fight Nutritionist.
The Fight Nutritionist, at the Fight Nutritionist on Instagram. Are you might be too young for Facebook. Is that not, you're not cool for that?
I am on Facebook. I don't really know how to use it anymore.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I was a part of the era when Facebook was released, so
So you were there, but you transitioned. You
I
left
was
it behind for
there.
Insta.
I
I
did,
hear
I
you.
did. I have a YouTube page. I will be launching my podcast, which you will have to come on
Hey,
in
absolutely.
January. Yep. So 2025, hopefully we'll have that going. But yeah, most active on Instagram. And then I
Love
think
it.
we're learning TikTok.
You know what? I think that's brilliant because what you just heard from Jackie is a strategy. She knows she needs to continue to grow. She knows an area that she needs to focus on, and she just so happens to have mentioned two things that anyone who's in her field, knowing what she does, and I think what you're trying to become, I would have recommended, which is you've got to get a strategy for YouTube, and nobody can ignore TikTok anymore. We're well beyond that.
We've got to be on TikTok.
Growth, because anybody under the age of, I would say, 29 is almost exclusively on those two things. Snapchat, I am a 44-year-old dad who doesn't really understand that, so I can't speak to how it works. But the other two, yes. So thank you so much, Miss Jackie Kaminsky, for coming on. I will absolutely have you back on, and we'll share some more stories about some of the challenges that we've had in life, but also I think that there's still some more meat on this bone that we could get into, but I so enjoyed it. Thank you.
Oh, I had a great time. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.